These view graphs show how we will fund the plan to rapidly implement UN SDG TAPs. This is TAP 31, which outlines funding, donation sources, and cost avoidance measures, and will also eliminate excessive inequalities, which is a SDG of the United Nations. In particular, these sources will provide upfront surge funding and donations to, in particular, get individuals self-sufficient as rapidly as possible. And it will also implement all the UN SDGs. Now, the upfront surge funding is tremendously important. It will cost way less than dragging it out because you'll get the people employed, making them self-sufficient, and then it will require no money. It'll take it for a little while as we get them completely self-sufficient. The other thing it'll do is rapidly get everyone in the world working together at decent work and living guaranteed wages and self-sufficient. By doing this, we'll also boost the economy right away by having people working and being able to buy things. Pay down the national debt and end sequestration austerity programs, and end recessions and economic collapses forever. Tax 32 is simplify and eliminate regressive taxation. Regressive taxation hurts the economy. If 90% of the people don't have money to buy food because they have to pay 10% sales tax on it, it hurts the economy. So the idea is to simplify all the tax codes, remove all the loopholes, and eliminate income, sales, state, corporate, and all of the taxes except for one. It'll be a very progressive property tax on the net assets of all individuals, corporations, and other entities with more than $1 million in net assets. So a small business that has less than $1 million in net assets will pay no taxes, and individuals with over $1 million in net, or less than $1 million in net assets will pay no taxes. And that's no matter where in the world the net assets are, including in overseas tax havens or people own property overseas. If citizens of the United States or people of the United States, they'll pay taxes on it. Now, if the country's charging taxes, that could be a deduction, but basically everything will pay. Now, the basic idea here is the rich are the only ones that can afford to pay taxes. The poor can't afford it, the middle class can't afford it. And they're paying the major part of them now. That's hurting the economy. It's hurting. Now, the corporations and businesses, and particularly individuals that have the money, can afford to pay it. An individual does not need $1 billion or $2 billion or 80 billion. If the richest man in this country has 80 billion, it is based absolutely on greed, and the psychologists now say self-doubt. And we can help these people by actually taxing them, and by the next step is to give them generous tax deductions based on the worthiness of their charitable cause that they're supporting. Now, I'm saying that if a generous rich person donates arable land that poor people can raise vegetables on, that's a very worthwhile charitable cause. And obviously this will reduce the cost of taxation by at least 90% collecting taxes, eliminate the need for at least 90% of the bookkeeping. Today, you have to have an EIN if you hire a nanny to take care of your kids. It will also eliminate all the unjust tax loopholes, because if the rich won't pay their taxes or don't, then the poor and the middle class have to pay them. And this idea of a sales tax, 98% of the people are paying the taxes. The 2% of the people uh, just don't buy that much stuff to make it possible to help the economy. The next view graph is about nationalizing the Federal Reserve because the Federal Reserve Act of 1913 is null and void. Before we talk about that, we need to understand what null and void means. And on this view graph, it lists about three things. If you go to paragraph 13.5.3, that's an action, a target action, and that's document number 13 is setting aside null and void statutes. And so this is TAP action 13.5.3. And you can read these paragraphs there, or you can read them right here. I'll leave it on for just a few minutes. But basically, an unconstitutional statute, although it looks like a law, it's not really a law. It's wholly void and ineffective. From the minute it was passed, it's never been in effect. Now, that's obvious to anybody that you could have laws that were not, if they're illegally passed, if they're unconstitutional, they cannot be effective. It's not a law, it confers no rights. The third bullet here is well settled that quite apart from the guarantee of equal protection, if a law impinges upon a fundamental right, explicitly or implicitly, it is presumably unconstitutional and therefore null and void, or it's at least avoidable. In some cases, you might have part of a law that is good and part of a law that is null and void. It can become voidable. This TAP 22 is about nationalizing the Federal Reserve. The last slide we talked about what null and void meant. And the first thing here is to vacate as null and void the Federal Reserve Act. Now, the Constitution requires that Congress print, appropriate all money. That's the Federal Reserve cannot legally print and give money to the banks. It's also it's unconstitutional, it's obtained by fraud, it's been used to commit fraud. Once it's nationalized, then the government will print and appropriate U.S. currency in exchange for Federal Reserve notes based on how they were earned and how they intend to be used. It will also recover and disgorge of Federal Reserve assets. On the books now, it shows that we owe the Federal Reserve well over $2 trillion. It's part of the national debt, which they gained this $2 trillion by obviously using the only money there was at the time, the Federal Reserve notes. So that needs to be recovered. That needs to be removed from the federal debt. And critical to all this, we need to avoid any recessions and economic collapses as this is handled. It'll be a great opportunity to get the people more in charge of the factories, and they'll do a way better job than the businessmen who are in business to make money. We need people in there that want to build products the best way possible. This is a key part of providing the funds for the UN SDGs also. After the Federal Reserve is nationalized, we need to nationalize all the large banks and all their branches and make the large bank and their branches into one national publicly owned bank, and each city, each state, and large cities have public banks. The banks can keep their names, but they'll basically be public. They, and they'll be managed by the same people that are managing the branch offices now. But they'll be publicly owned. They'll be all transparent, and they'll make low or no interest loans directly into the economy, including to states, cities, worthwhile businesses, and institutions that generate jobs. We also need to outlaw the fractional banking, the trading of derivatives, and mortgages. And that concludes today. You can read more about all this. There are many more things that need to be done in TAP 22. It's about nationalizing Federal Reserve, all the large banks, and all their branches. Thank you. Have a great day.